Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Epol Experts, episode 3. My name is Sipo, and today I'll be joined by my colleague from our Epol Worcester branch. His name is Danny Castins. Today we'll be discussing, or we'll have a quick conversation around broiler farming and broiler profitability. What we will be covering today would include, in broiler farming, what to measure, why to measure, and how to measure. Just before we go into details in terms of today's presentation, I'd like to remind everyone that's viewing today that farming is actually a business, and every business aim is actually be profitable or to make profit. And as such, every decision that is made in the business impacts on profitability. Just a quick example on that one. It might not seem like a financial decision, a simple decision as deciding to not come to work or coming to work an hour late or to leave work an hour early. All of such activities or decisions might actually impact on the business in the sense that you might have less hours in the business, or you might not be able to have sufficient time to cover all the things that you've intended to cover for that particular day, which ultimately means that you have less productivity and ultimately less profitability on the business. So it is important as a business person and as a farmer to actually be able to make informed decisions. I've decided to spend a couple of minutes to put together what I would then term a decision-making process. It starts with collecting data. So in our case, in the context of farming, it would be information that you collect from your chicken houses, which you will then be able to sit down, analyze. Once you have an insight into what actually happened, you will then be able to make a decision or base your decision on the analysis, and after which you will then be able to make a decision and then take action afterwards. I think the biggest question then becomes, if I need to make certain decisions, what are some of the things that I need to record, and what are some of the things that are important in the business that I need to measure such that I'm able to then have a profitable farming business? Take, for instance, if you've ordered some chicks, that will be more on the operation side of things. So you need to record the number of chicks that you will receive and place, the dates at which or on which you will be placing, and if available by extension, the source of hatchery and the parent stock, the age, and all of that information, which you will then record and keep for future reference as well. Under feed, some of the things that you might want to consider recording would include things like feed consumed, cumulative feed from when you place your flock up to when you slaughter. You need to be able to count that and then compound that into an amount that tells you more or less how much feed you have used. You need to also know where your source of water is coming from, how much water are you using, the quality of water, and such related matters. Electricity, quite a lot of cost that will come from the heating would actually be electricity. So you also need to understand and be able to measure what sort of quantities are you using, what sort of cost in terms of electricity and heating do you need, and all of that. And vaccinations, you need to know what to vaccinate, how much to vaccinate with, and what vaccines at what age, and all of that. So all of that is one of the things that you need to measure. Things like veterinarian fees, labor, heating, transport, sample weight, or sample weight in terms of weekly, depending on how and when you decide to measure, as well as age and weight to market ratio versus what the breeder is saying you should be getting. In production, you would have to look at issues of feed conversion ratio, which effectively means how much feed did you give in, and in return, how much live weight did you get from your birds growing out to full cycle. Average daily gain, which basically means at what rate are your chickens growing daily, and if you have that measured, you will then be able to compare that against what the breeder is saying you should be getting, and based on that, you'll be able to make a decision whether do you need to adjust, or are you on par, or are you below par. And if you are below par, you will then be able to collect data and then be able to analyze and find out why are you below par or why are you above par. Average live mass, which effectively means on average, what is the live mass of the entire flock, as well as stocking density. We did touch a little bit of this on the episode 2, where we did mention that stocking density is actually a management decision. We did highlight that the lesser you put, the less money you'll be able to make per square meter in that house, and the more you can put, the more money you'll be able to put. And we did also highlight that you need to be careful. If you are not certain, you need to contact your nearest advisor to advise you on this, lest you run into issues of animal welfare and all of that. kg broiler weight per square meter, that also is a management decision, and it is also a financial decision in the sense that if you can produce more kgs per square meter in the chicken house, you will then be able to run a much more profitable and successful broiler operation based on that. Then we also spoke about performance efficiency factor, which basically means in terms of cost and feed that goes into feed, how much kgs live weight or slaughtered are you getting back? If you can spend less money, or if you can input less feed and all the other costs compounded, and you can get more kgs per square meter, it means that your performance per square meter in the chicken house is actually very efficient. Mortality rate, which effectively means from the number that you started with in terms of chickens up to when you slaughter, or up to when you cull and remove all your chicken in the chicken houses, how many of those chickens did die? And we look at that as a fraction or as a percentage of the total flock. Culls, which effectively says or means that how many of those chickens couldn't make through. You may have had to cull them and maybe slaughter them, or you may have to cull them and then sell them earlier than anticipated. And obviously also from the production point of view, you also need to measure and quantify slaughter information. So that is to say how many chickens were sent to slaughter, at what weight, what was the average weight, and to a certain degree, the price that you're getting per kg slaughtered and sent to an abattoir. From the cost point of view, you're looking at how much is my feed costing me. Need I remind you that from a production point of view, feed would actually constitute anything in the region of 65 to 70% of your production cost for your cycle. So it is important to keep a good eye and measure and track the trends in terms of, are my feed costs increasing? Are my feed costs stable, or am I decreasing? If I'm decreasing, what is it that I'm doing right? Am I sacrificing? Am I still getting the same performance? And what is my feed conversion ratio is? So you're also looking at the cost of chicks, the cost of vaccinations, and whatever else that you would need to produce. Cost of production, which essentially means what sort of budgets do I need to have in order for me to set up and be able to run that production cycle? You might want to look at it from a production cycle point of view, or holistically from as many of the houses that you have in the chicken farm. How much does it cost me to run and to produce those chickens? You're also looking at operational cost, which essentially means of all the costs that I have, how much do I need to run the entire operation? And then overhead cost basically means, other than production cost and operational cost, what are some of the costs that are necessary to keep the business going? Transport cost. Transport cost is two ways. You're also looking at transport cost from an input point of view. If I remember correctly, it must have been Martin from episode 1 who actually did mention that the further you are from your closest input base, the more money you are likely to pay to bring your inputs to the farm. But also from a marketing or a forwarding point of view, the further you are away from your market or your slaughterhouse, the most likely you will incur more cost in sending your products to the market. So you want to be positioned strategically such that you incur less cost bringing inputs into your business, and you incur less cost sending your final products to the market. And obviously, as a business, you also need to budget in terms of all those costs that you will require. You need to budget in terms of saying, this is how much money I will need to produce my chickens. And if there are any variances or if there are any discrepancies, you need to then follow up and find out, did I over budget? Did I under budget? If you did under budget, by how much? And do I need to make so much money available in the future so that I'm able to cover all the costs that are required to successfully produce profitably my chickens in my business? From the sales point of view, you're looking at money coming in. Obviously, for any business to be able to make profit, the business needs to have either a service or a product to sell. In this particular instance, we're talking about broilers. So am I getting my money coming in? And if so, at what price per unit? Our units in this particular instance being broilers produced. We're also looking at issues of demand versus forecast. So you need to know more or less, if I produce X amount of beds, for instance, let's say if I produce 300 beds every 32 days, is that Is there demand for that, or is there less demand for that, or is there more demand for that, in which case it would mean that you have room to still grow as a business. And in order for you to do that, initially you will need to focus. So you need to study the market and try and understand what would be the ideal amount to start with, and what would be the ideal amount or quantities in terms of broilers that I need in order to be able to meet and satisfy my market demand. Overall inventory turnaround, basically that looks at average beds in the stock. Currently, the industry is sitting at about anything between 32 to 37 days production cycle. So the longer you keep your beds, the longer you are likely that you would get less profit coming, through sales from those beds. So you don't want to keep your chickens longer than it is necessary for you to make profits in your business. That also talks to issues of inventory aging analysis. The longer you keep your beds, the less money or the less profit you'll be able to get for the business. And also you also need to measure average selling price. So that is to say, from your cost point of view, how much are you or should you be selling your chickens at? And then when you've determined that, you will then look at the market and say, but at what price are my competitors selling, and at what price is my market willing to take those chickens? And then as a business, you will then be able to position yourself such that you are not overpriced in the market, but at the same time, you are able to recover and make as optimum margin or profits as you possibly can from your production flock. In order for you to be able to make all those decisions, you also need to have your records up to standard. So I do encourage you that you actually invest some time in setting up some record keeping activities. From the Epol point of view, we do have a broiler management card, which actually is a very essential tool, which also helps you to keep those records. So if you do get your hands on one, and if you open it, you will realize that it allows you to sort of have the following information. So you'll be able to record activities on daily basis, all the way up to 35, anything up to 42 days. You'll be able to record your feed use, you'll be able to record your mortalities, live weights, feed supplied, feed remaining, and all of that, which you will then ultimately be able to quantify, both in terms of cost and both in terms of their impact on the farming operation profitability. So still on record keeping, one of the things that you might want to measure would be cumulative feed intake, because once you know how much it takes to feed one broiler, you will then be able to cost how much it costs you to feed that particular broiler. Once you have that, you will then be able to compare in terms of what the breeder is saying you should be feeding, and in terms of what your fellow farmers in the industry are feeding. And then you will know whether you are overfeeding, over-allocating feed, or you're underfeeding, and that versus the performance of your chickens throughout the cycle. We also look at issues of mortality rates. So every day, usually say in the morning, midday, and in the afternoon, you also need to go into the chicken houses and determine if there are any mortalities, and if so, you need to record them. And once you're at the end of the production cycle, you then need to be able to look at mortality rates as a fraction percentage of the beds that you started with at the beginning of the cycle. Normally, we would say 5% mortality rate is acceptable, but any chickens that died in the chicken house, that's not necessary, is actually a loss to the business. So I want to encourage you as farmers to make sure that you have as minimal mortality rates as possible in your chicken houses. One of the things that you need to measure would be bed weight. So 7 days, 14 days, 21 days up to when you slaughter weight. That is important in the sense that it helps you to compare versus what the breeder is saying you should be getting, but at the same time, you also are able to compare what's happening in the industry. So in order for you to be able to do that, you will need to have a scale, and you will need to record every time you do the weighing. Usually it's that we do in every 7-day intervals up to when you slaughter or you cull all those beds. You would also need to record all the cost. So we look at overall cost. That could be labor, it could be feed, it could be vaccine, it could be vet. Whatever cost that you incur, you need to be able to record that, and then you'll need to compare that with what everyone is getting in the industry or what everyone is producing in the industry. But also you'll be able to compare with your previous cycles, and that way you are able to determine the trend to say, am I incurring more cost producing, or am I decreasing on the cost? And if there is a need, you'll be able to investigate and find ways and means to cut back on the cost that you're incurring for every production cycle that you are producing. You also need to look at the daily feed intake. That way you are able to budget well in advance the quantities of the feed that you will need for that particular number of birds that you have on the farm. That way you never ever have to worry about running out of feed during the production cycle. You may be wondering why we're talking about all of this. I mean, why measure? The one part of it is to know what happened. That way, if you know what happened, you know what to expect in the future. You are able to then establish a slow trend in terms of saying, this is what I can expect, this is what's happening in my production house. And when you discuss it with your advisor or your other fellow farmers in the industry, you are able to give them a much more detailed insight into what's happening in your chicken houses. Then either an advisor or whoever else that you're discussing it with is then able to input with an insight and the understanding of the background that you're facing in your business. You must always remember the saying that says, if it's not measured, then it cannot be managed. But also, you also need to understand that if there is no record of it, then you might not be able to establish the trend, the history, and you will not be able to forecast in terms of what you can expect to happen in the future. But also, you also want to measure so that you are able to identify if there are any problems. It's the only way that you'd be able to say, this is what I expected, and I'm not getting what is expected. And then you start to ask yourself why it is that you're not getting what's expected. Whether we're looking at it from a revenue point of view or whether we're looking at it from an operations or production point of view, it makes sense that if there are problems, you are able to trace them based on the records that you've kept. But also you want to know, you want to be able to find solutions to problems that you've identified, that are crippling your profitability, in your business. So you need to be able to say, this is what happened, this is what I expected will happen, or this I did not expect to happen. Why is it not happening? And then what is the solution to the problem that I'm facing? All of that you'd be able to do once you know what you're facing. And then you'd be able to then give feedback. Whether it's feedback to yourself in terms of saying this is what I need to adjust, or it's feedback in terms of labor that you have on the farm to say this is where the problem is and this is how we're going to fix the problem. But also, you also want to measure so that you can enable continuous improvement. If you do not know what your production is, you will then not be able to improve from where you stand. You will in fact not even be sure whether you're producing it the right way, whether you're getting the right production, or you are below what everyone else in the industry is getting. Just a quick run. If you look at the graph, I have a graph there of average daily gain. If you look at farmer one is way above farmer two in terms of production or in terms of average daily gain. But if you look at production cycle 6, farmer one is sitting at 59 and farmer two is sitting at 52. And for both of their farms, it's actually normal. But if you look at production cycle 7, in fact, farmer one actually drops, which is a problem for him. But if you look at farmer two is comparatively sitting on average daily gain difference of about 2, which for him is normal. So if you were farmer two, you might want to actually visit and have a discussion with farmer one to say, but what is it that you are doing better that I'm not doing? So you would go, if you're farmer one, you'd be able to supply records of what you are doing. And if you're farmer two, you're also able to supply and compare records of what you are doing. And that way you are able to then find what each of you are doing differently and whether it works for your businesses or identify where the problem is, and you will then be able to find solutions going forward. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, that would be a wrap for me. I would like to maybe leave space for my colleague Danny down in the Cape to take you through part 2. And part 2 would be a little bit more in-depth in terms of calculations and technical information that would actually help you determine whether or not are you making profit for your business. But until then, please take a moment. We'll go through a quick break, and then on the other side of the break, Danny will take you through part 2 of the session. Before we do that, I also encourage you to actually start sending through questions. We will then be able to cover them under the question and answer session later on in the session. Thank you so much.
Ek is Johan Stemmet van Montetjie en ek boer in die Klein Karoo. My pa het begin boer in 1984 en ek het toe ek uit die weermag uitkom in 91 saam met hom begin boer. Hoofsaaklik toe met lenne geboer. En toe in 91 toe het ons begin met braaikekens en ons het 'n slagpaal opgesit op die perseel en van daar af het die ding maar net 'n bietjie gegroei en ons is nog steeds in die bedryf. Ons koop voer sedert 1991 al van Epol af en ons het 'n baie goeie verhouding met hulle. Hulle het vir ons 'n kliëntemengsel opgemaak en ons is regtig bevoorreg om met hulle geassosieer te wees en ons kry baie goeie diens uit ons voerverteenwoordigers daar nie en ek kan net met lof van hom praat. Ons slag ons hoenders basies in 'n 7 dae periode uit. So ons werk oor 'n periode van 7 dae. So dis 'n baie fyn lyn om nie te veel kos in die hoender in te sit sodat hy te vet raak en dan sit jy met 'n hoender wat te vet is nie. So jou hoeveelheid proteïene en vette moet presies reg wees om die hoender op die regte gewig te hê en laat hy nie te groot raak in daai periode nie, omdat ons basies een abattoir het wat ons heeltyd moet voorsien van die plaas af en nie verskillende groeiers het wat vir ons kykens voorsien nie, ons doen al self. So dis 'n baie belangrike punt dat jou voer hoeveelhede en ja, ons het dit maar oor die jare het ons dit reg gekry om 'n baie goeie formule bymekaar te sit. Ons slag self die hoenders op die perseel en ons het maar 'n klein abattoirtjie, ons het ook maar begin by 50 'n dag en so het ons groter geraak en ons doen amper 1000 nou 'n dag. Dit bly 'n uitdaging met wette wat heeltyd verander en gesondheidswette wat spesifiek verander, maar ja, ons voldoen aan alles en ons probeer elke dag die standaard net beter en beter maak. Een ding wat ek moet sê wat positief is ons glo almal sal altyd hoender as proteïen gebruik. En dit is 'n goedkoop vorm van proteïene en ek dink dis die beste vorm van proteïene wat die meeste beskikbaar is. So ja, vorentoe glo ek daar's altyd 'n mark vir hoender. En ons vertrou ons Hemelse Vader elke dag wat ons hier is.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Donnie Carstens, and I'm going to handle the second part of this profitability discussion. Thank you, Epol, for the insights in the first part. You laid a good groundwork for us to take it from there and talk a little bit more about get more technical. So the title of this presentation is my broiler business profitable? So in this presentation, we'll be covering firstly, what calculations should I be doing after all the measurements you did, what Epol told you about, and then how will these calculations help me to make some decisions, and then we'll look at a case study to try to incorporate all these measurements and calculations you did. So first and foremost, one of the most important calculations you will be doing is the feed conversion ratio. So basically what it is, it's the quantity of feed consumed divided by the total weight of broilers. So if you fed 100 kgs of feed to your broilers and they ended up weighing 70 kgs, your FCR or feed conversion ratio will be 1.42. So that says that for every 1.42 kg of feed that was consumed, 1 kg of live mass for the broiler was produced. The next calculation, Epol already mentioned it, is the average live mass per bird. So how you calculate that is you take your total weight of your live broilers divided by the total number of broilers, and then you get to a average live mass per bird. So to go through the example, the total weight of the broilers in the group was 2,000 kgs total, divided by 900 birds. So the average live mass was 2.2 kg per bird. This is important. All of these calculations is important to finally work out what your profitability or your efficiency of the farm was. Bear in mind, as we go through the calculations, these calculations will be later on used in more advanced formulas to see how efficient are you farming. The next point is more like a record keeping or a decision making tool rather than a calculation, but you still need to do a calculation to get to the point where you want to be. So it's about stocking density. So basically it's the number of broilers per square meter that is known as stocking density. So beforehand you're going to decide at how much broilers are you going to place per square meter. So how you do the calculation is you take a total number of broilers which you're going to place and divide it by the square meters of the house, which is the length times the width in meters to get to the square meters. So most of the medium-sized businesses have stock at around about 16 birds per square meter. That is also the cutoff point for the free range or acceptable free range recommendation is 16 birds per square meter. But commercially you can go up anything from 20 to 22 even per square meter. The next calculation that you can do is you do this after you've delivered your broilers. So it's to determine what was the kgs per square that you produced. So it's the kilogram of broiler weight per square meter, or the number of kilograms or live mass of broilers produced per square meter. This is a tool to determine your efficiency on the farm. You want to push as much kilograms per square meter as you will make more profit. The higher you can go on this without losing any or have any animal welfare issues. So the calculation is done by taking the total weight of the broilers and divided by the number of square meters in the house. So we'll go through a little example. So in this example, you had 9,000 kgs of broilers and you divide it by the square meters of the house. So in this instance, the house was 25 meters long and it was 10 meters wide. So the square meters of this house would be 250 square meters. So you take the total amount, 9,000 kilograms of broilers, divided by the 250 square meters, and you get to a point of 36 kg of broiler per square meter. Then we get to the performance efficiency factor. This is an index value where you can benchmark yourself to see how efficiently are you farming. This calculation takes into account the average live mass. Remember what we talked about the average live mass earlier. It's a calculation we did slightly earlier in this presentation. Then you multiply it by the percentage of survivors. The reason why this is important, or the record keeping was important, is as Epol said, you're tracking your mortalities in your cows. So your percentage survivors is the amount that's left after you've subtracted your mortalities from your total amount that you started with. So that part divided by your FCR, we spoke about the FCR firstly, it's the amount of feed used per kilogram broiler produced, times your age of slaughter in days of your chickens. So that's your average days of slaughter times 100. So let's run through the calculation quickly. Average live mass times your percentage of survivors divided by your feed conversion ratio times your age of slaughter in days times 100. So you will get to an amount of anything ranging between 250 and 450 in most cases. So you can even go more higher than 450 or even lower than 250. But for the for this presentation, I only took it where the most of instances occurs in our country. So if you get to a PEF of anything below 250, that's a very poor a poor point to be at. So anything from there up to 300 will be in the poor category. Anything from 300 to 350 is average. Anything from 350 up to 400 is good and even very good. And then anything above 400 is excellent. But now you have to remember the PEF isn't everything. The performance efficiency factor is only as I said, the index value to see how efficiently you're farming. But it's actually doesn't have too much to do with profitability, because you will be able to buy a more dense feed and get a much higher PEF, but not farm as profitable as possible. So you can even farm more profitably when your PEF is in the lower range at 350 to 375. So PEF is a good indication, but it's not everything. Very important to remember that. Then the next calculation that you do is you calculate your income. Very important. So how you calculate income is you take a total kilogram of chicken delivered times your price per kg or your revenue per kg, which you currently get in the market. Or the other scenario is if you're in the live chicken market, take the number of birds sold times your price per bird delivered. The next slide is about your total feed cost. So how you determine that? You don't only feed one feed to broilers. You have at least 2 or 3 phases that you go through when you feed them. So you need to take into account the phase, the price per phase, and the amount you used per phase. So in this example, the starter phase, the price in the starter phase was 5 Rand a kg. You used 40 kgs, so that comes to a point of 200 Rand for that phase. In the grower phase, at 4.90 Rand a kg, you used, for example, 80 kgs, and you get to a point of 392 Rand for that phase. And in the finisher phase, at a price point of 4.60 Rand per kg times 120 kilograms used in this phase, cost you 552 for the finisher phase. And if you add these 3 values for starter, grower, and finisher, you get to a total feed cost of 1144, so 1,144 Rand. So again, this total feed cost is important for the later on profit calculations we will be doing. Then another measure of efficiency is what is your feed cost per kilogram of broiler produced. The lower you can get on this, the better you will do. So either get your feed cost down or get the kilograms produced higher. So the calculation is done by taking the total feed cost divided by the total kilograms of broilers delivered. Or in the live chicken market, it works slightly differently. You don't use the kilograms, so you will use the total feed cost divided by your price per broiler bird delivered. So it's not per kg, it's per bird in the live market. Then Sipho also ticked on this one earlier in his presentation, chick cost. So how do you calculate that? It's your chick price. For example, here in this instance, it was 5 Rand per chick times the number of chicks placed. So for this example, at 5 Rand per chick, you placed 300 chicks. So for that site, it was 1,500 Rand for that house. All right. The next calculations you can be doing is to determine what's your margin. So if you want to determine your income ahead of feed cost, it's your income minus your feed expense. So a good calculation to be doing just to measure yourself, how are you doing in that house. As Sipho said, you're going to build yourself a track record as you keep your records throughout your year or your X amount of cycles, and you can benchmark yourself against yourself in your cycles. So then you can calculate a margin per square meter as well. Again, this is to see how efficiently you are utilizing your square meters which you have available on your farm. So that's the margin ahead of feed cost, as I explained here on the top. So margin divided by your square meters. And again, this is to benchmark yourself against yourself. So in the previous cycle, for example, you made 70 Rand for that square. The next cycle you made 65 Rand per square. You must go and look why was it different? Was it mortalities? Did they eat more? Did they eat less? Did they not grow as well? And and to get to an answer, why was it better or why was it worse? Or if it's the same, then you're on the same point. And then finally, we get to the point of calculating your profit. So that is your income minus all of the expenses, as Sipho mentioned earlier, and the calculations we did earlier. So the expenses include your feed cost, chick cost, heating cost, vaccine cost, shavings, labor cost, cost to clean the houses, water treatment costs, maintenance costs. So that's basically your total amount of income minus your total amount of all expenses. So next we're going to look at a case study to see where do you find how do you decide what feed company to use? What's important, what's not important, what's more important than something else? So in this case study, it's a trial that was done and the records that was kept. So at the end, you will see why it is so important to keep these records. Because without these records, it would, on the eye, if you just look at it, it will look more or less the same. But the moment you start doing the calculations for profit, then you'll see there's quite a large difference actually. So let's get right into it. So for this example, it was Epol versus another feed company. The feed price on the Epol side was R5.60 per kg versus the other feed company was R5.50 per kg. Then the age where the broilers was slaughtered on was 32 days on both sides. So it was the same for both. Then the live weight on the Epol side was 1.9 kg and on the other feed company it was 1.85 kg. Doesn't look like a big difference, but as I said, bear with me, we will put that into perspective slightly later. The amount of feed consumed on the Epol side was 2.7 kg of feed, and on the other feed company it was 2.81 kg of feed. Again, not a big difference, but please bear with me. So if we do the calculation for FCR, as we handled earlier in this presentation, 2.7 kgs of feed divided by the live weight of the broiler, we get to 1.42. On the other feed company side, we had 2.81 kilogram of feed divided by the live weight of 1.85, we get to 1.52 FCR. So that's 10 points difference between the two. So if we calculate the feed cost per bird, that is the feed cost, R5.60, as above here, times the amount of feed, R2.70, as we saw here. Total, R15.11 on the Epol side. On the other feed company side, it was R5.50 per kg of feed, times 2.81 kgs of feed, as here, and we get to the total of R15.47. Revenue, on both sides we worked with 17 Rand a kg live weight for on the Epol and the other feed company, because your market is the same where you market your chickens. If you calculate your revenue per bird, it's your revenue 17 Rand times your live weight, as stated here, you get to 32.30 Rand revenue per bird on the Epol side, versus on the other feed company side 17 Rand per kg of live chicken times 1.85 chicken, you get to 31.45 Rand. So there's a difference in revenue between the two. If we determine the margin per bird, that is revenue minus your feed cost. So it's 32.30 Rand, what we calculated here, minus 15.11 Rand, what we calculated here, get to 17.19 Rand. If we do the same on the other side of the other feed company, it's 31.45 Rand revenue, as we calculated here, minus your feed cost, 15.47 Rand, what we calculated here, you get to 15.98 Rand. So you can already see there is a significant difference between the two. If we put that in margin per live kg live weight, you get to a 17.19 Rand as we calculated here, divided by 1.9 kgs. There, this is the live weight or the average live weight, as I showed you how to determine that earlier. You get to a margin of 9.05 Rand per kg of live weight. Versus on the other company, it was 15.98 Rand margin, divided by 1.85, you get to a point of 8.64 Rand. So now you can ask me, what does this mean now? Okay, we see what you did, but what does it mean? Put it into perspective for us. If you take the margin difference per bird, which we calculated in this line here, of 17.19 Rand, and you subtract the 15.98 Rand on the other side, it's around about 1.21 Rand per bird. So to put it into perspective, for example, you reared 10,000 broilers for the cycle. That would have made a 12,000 Rand more profit difference, although the feed was more expensive. So feed price isn't always everything. You usually get what you pay for. So now the question arises, okay, but the performance is better, but how much can I actually pay more for the feed when it will still be worthwhile? So for this instance, I did the calculation. if you can even go up to R6.04 per kg to get to a similar point at margin, then you are more or less at 16 Rand per kg margin versus 15 Rand 98. That's very close to each other. Your feed cost will increase slightly, but as I said, your margin is the important part. So that will be more or less then 55 cents more expensive than the other company, or 550 Rand a ton. Yeah, more or less. So it's quite a large difference what your performance is costing you, or how much you can be better off buying a superior product with superior performance. So yeah, this was just to put it a little bit more into perspective for you guys. Thank you for listening to my story. We will take a quick break now, and then after the break we will be back and answer some of your questions. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Danny, for a great presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to my favorite parts of today's session where we take and answer all your questions. Without further delay, let us take to the first question. Danny, do you have a question for me that side?
Hi, thank you, Sipho. Yes, the first question I have on this side for you is, can I keep chickens at different ages in one house with partition to keep them differently according to their ages? What's your thoughts on that?
Yes, that's a question that we get quite often in the industry, and that's usually coming from small-scale farmers that are trying and get a continuous supply of chickens. My straight answer to that is we do not advise that from a point of view of saying there's a biosecurity risk. You cannot actually keep in the same house, even with partitions in place. It's not ideal to keep your older flocks with in the same house with your younger flocks. There is a higher risk of disease transfer on that, and you would not be able to farm or produce optimally. All whilst in the process, you're running the risk of getting your younger flock, in fact, contaminated or infected. I'm not sure. What do you think on that one, Danny?
Yeah, Sipho, thank you for your input. I completely agree with you. As the question says, can I keep chickens? You probably can, but your performance is not going to be nearly to what you want to expect. So I won't definitely not advise you to do it like that. It's better to keep a single age house with one age of broiler in there, everything in, everything out, to keep it clean and to be able to decontaminate it between cycles even.
I agree. No problem. We have a second question that says, how expensive is it to set up a broiler house? And this particular viewer says, I'd like to start with about just 100 broilers. So it's a question of cost, infrastructure, which I believe also did touch a little bit on last episode. So how expensive is it? We're looking at something basic here, Danny. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, Sipho, I don't have exact figures in front of me at this moment, so I would like if we can do some research on this topic and answer this question next week when we have our question and answer session. So let's get back to the viewers with this one, and we have some time to do calculations, and yeah, then we'll answer this one next week.
No, definitely, I agree with you. I think it comes down to saying, how high tech do you want to go in terms of what budgets do you have available? In my experience in the industry, for instance, I remember quite a while back, I assisted one farmer who wanted to start with about 700 beds, and it costed him in the region of about, I'd say 40,000, including your corrugated iron structure, concrete floor, a bit of feeders, a bit of drinkers, just your standardized, nothing high tech, nothing automated, nothing to that effect. So I would say that is largely dependent on how you want to start, largely dependent on the budgets that you have. Obviously, if you want to go full scale, high tech, environmentally controlled, for about, I'd say 10,000 broilers, you're looking in the region of anything between 800,000 to just about $1.5 million, depending on who you're using to help you construct the chicken house. But like you said, Danny, I do agree with you. Maybe let's give it a bit more details, put more flesh on the question when we return for a question and answer session sometime next week, Thursday.
Okay,
no
Sipho,
problems.
Thank you for your input there. I have another question for you here. In your presentation, you had the broiler feed card. One of our viewers wants to know, where can they find a feed card like that?
Awesome. Ideally, maybe be in contact with your local sales rep or technical advisor. They should know in terms of the area where you can get it. It can either be your closest co-op, it can be our closest factory, or they might be able to make means to actually bring it to you or make arrangements for you to come and collect. But otherwise, we're also looking at the possibility of having it linked up online. So our viewers would be able to go on our Epol website, epol.co.za, under downloads, and be able to download it from there as well. So whatever works for the viewer, whether by advisor or visiting the local factory or through the co-op or online, whatever that's convenient, they should be able to access our broiler management card from there.
Okay.
Also,
thank you very much.
Awesome. I see questions keep coming. Do we have another question that side?
Sipho, yes, we have a question. Please clarify the point on curtains. As I didn't get the part where you are talking about opening, must they open from the bottom to top or top to bottom? Can you please shed some light on that for us?
Awesome. There was, I believe there was episode 2 of our Epol Expect episode. One of the series aimed at educating our viewers and farmers at home. The question about curtains keeps coming up. Basically what it is your curtain must open from the top to the bottom. And there is a technical thinking linked to that as well. The reason there is you want to manage the air inflow. First, there is the science that says hot air rises. So the idea of having your curtains open is to try and allow the hot air to escape, but at the same time to try and protect your chickens on the floor. So what makes us discourage trying to open your curtains bottom up is that the moment you open your curtain from the bottom, you're exposing your chickens to either stronger winds or colder winds, which in turn will stress the chickens and possibly have an impact on the growth on your chickens. So what we are advising is that install your curtains such that they open from top to bottom so that it's ideal. So you are able to allow hot air to rise and escape the house, but at the same time you're protecting your chickens on the floor from being exposed to harsh winds and air coming in as well. So that's what's motivated that's what motivates us to actually advise it to be that way. Danny, here's the question for you, man. I hear this one must be directed at you from our viewers. It says, how are the birds weighed when you have a large flock? So this is more based or geared for a large commercial flock. What would be your input on that one, Danny?
Okay, sorry, Sipho, can you just repeat the question, please?
The question is, how are the birds weighed when you have a large flock? So that's more for your larger flocks, your 10,000 odd chickens in the same chicken house and more. How would you advise our viewers? How do they go about weighing in that situation?
Okay, Sipho, so if we're talking about test weights that you take through the cycle, you will determine on what your standard is. Usually they have a crate in the house that they use, and they put in a specific amount of broilers in the crate to get to an average weight per broiler. So for example, your crate can house, say, 10 chicks in there. You'll take your crate, randomly choose 10 chicks from the flock. Well, you must zero the scale before you put the chicks in the crate. Weigh the 10 broilers. Do the sum, take the total, divide by the 10 broilers, and you have your average weight per broiler. And that you do it on the same way up till, say, 28 days. You'll probably not get as much into a crate, so you can either use a larger crate or use a smaller one with less chicks in there. But remember, you must to get a more accurate reading in your house, you must do repetitive measures. So the more you weigh that on a specific day, the more accurate your value will be. Why the test weights is important is exactly what your aim is. Say, for example, your aim is at 2.2 or 2 kg broiler. You will definitely know at, say, day 28 what your broilers must weigh by that time. So that's why this whole thing is so important. Then regarding the weights when you slaughter, you have because we are talking about such large amounts of broilers, you can't weigh them individually. So usually what happens, you get a catching team that comes in, the trucks get loaded with broilers in the crates. Before the truck started loading, they zero the truck and then weigh the weight of the complete truck afterwards. That's that usually happens on the farm if they have a scale there. And then exactly the same happens at the abattoir before. So you then just the full weight as they go in and the empty weight as they come out. And then you get the total weight of the broilers, and the amount of broilers that's on the load, so you can determine your average live mass from there by taking again, as in the presentation, taking the total weight divided by the amount of broilers to get to an average.
No, definitely.
Great, Sipho. In
Yes.
the same breath, I have another question for you. Let me just get to it quickly. The question is, my market wants older, large live birds. What Epol feed can I use to ensure a maximum profit?
Awesome. I assume that the viewer that's asking the question has already started farming, and based on that, maybe have tried a couple of products. It would be difficult from our part, not understanding in which region the viewer is, to actually direct them to a specific product. But in a broader context of things, on the Epol side of things, you might have what we call the EconoGrow, you might have what we call the OptiGrow, or you might have what we call the Ultra High Grow product. So you can use any of these products to actually get to a market weight that you want to achieve. You might be targeting, for instance, 2 kgs at 32 days, or you might be targeting 2.5 kgs maybe at 42 days, depending on your production cycle as well. But to paint a more accurate scenario, let's say maybe you're targeting 42 days production cycle, and you are maybe targeting about 2.5 kgs of live weight. So you will then follow as advised, maybe for your first 2 weeks, your starter, and then your next 2 weeks grower, and then your next 2 weeks finish. And then you can keep your birds longer on the post finisher. That way, when you do that, you're actually maintaining them and you're encouraging them to actually eat slightly a bit more to give you more weight towards the end. I'm not sure. Maybe do you have a different view to that?
Sipho, no, I'm very happy with your answer. As you said, we have the different ranges feed for different points you want to reach. So more than happy with that. Contact your Epol technical advisor to come to your farm and to give you a recommendation. Happy.
Awesome. Here's an interesting one. I think this talks to more of our presentation today. It says, if I'm buying feed from Epol for my broilers and I need to yield a profit of 35,000 rands, how many chickens should I farm with? And then it says an estimation would be okay. I think this one would be difficult. Maybe let me go first, Danny, and then I'll give you an opportunity as well to step in as you see fit. But from where we stand, because every business incurs or attracts different costs, and the configurations in terms of how you set up and all of that is different, and the cost factor linked to that is different. It would then be difficult to say to the viewer at home or at the farm to say start with X amount of chickens. I think the right way of doing it would be to try and say, I want to start with X amount of chickens. Say, for argument's sake, I want to start with 3,000 chickens, and this is how I plan on going about it. Maybe place 1,000 chickens every second week to enable continuous supply of chickens. And then based on that configuration or based on that business setup, you will then be able to calculate how much profit am I making. Then you can adjust and play around with the numbers versus, at what price are you selling in the market, to a point where you're able to say, if I have 3,000 chickens and I produce 1,000 chicken and send them to a market every week, I will then be able to comfortably make my 30,000 or 35,000 rands profit, or whichever other profit amount it might be. So from where we stand, it would be difficult to say start with X amount of chickens, given the fact that the cost that you will attract for your business specifically would be different. I'm not sure, Danny, what do you think on this one?
Yeah, Sipho, yeah, I agree with you. Very difficult to shoot out of the hip for that one. So my way of doing it would be exactly the same as yours. Starting small, maybe doing 1 or 2 cycles and extrapolate from there, because as you said, the system differs. Because just one small example, the person asking the question, how much laborers does he have, for example, and that labor cost going to be allocated to the broiler farm of the part, or maybe to another part of the farm. So very difficult to say, but yeah, maybe do 1 or 2 cycles, get a feel for it, and extrapolate it to where you get to your wished amount, where you want to be at. Okay, Sipho, yes. Another question I have here from one of the viewers: are you allowed to grow the bird up to 2 kgs because of the demand? And if so, what are the risks and the disadvantages? So I'm gonna start with the answer here. The quick answer. It's totally dependent on what the market wants. What the market wants from you, and then are you a contract grower for a larger group? And what does the contract say? Are you going to get penalized if it's higher than the 2 kgs? So it's dependent on a lot of factors. And then even if you, as you said earlier in your presentation, you get to a point where after that certain point, you don't make money from that broiler anymore. There's a cut off up to where you make margin, and after that broiler starts to eat his own profit up. So again, dependent on the market. And yeah, the other risks that you have as older as they get, and you get, for example, a break of a disease or something, then it's a lot of capital on the ground on the chicken house. A lot of capital in the sense of you put a lot of feed and a lot of expenses into that. So the longer you keep it, the larger the risk gets. And for every mortality you have, it's a lot of feed and costs that's allocated to that specific broiler. So yeah, you can grow larger dependent on your market. You can even grow less. It depends all on your system and what your market wants from you. Do you maybe have anything to add on that one, Sipho?
Yes, definitely. On that one, I'd like to introduce a slightly more, call it business-orientated approach to it. I understand that your view is more on the production, linking that to business as well. But from a business and profitability point of view, the quicker you can get to your market weight and you sell, the better. So if your market actually says, the demand is that you need to produce a 2 kg bed and you can produce it quicker. So that is to say, I'd say for 2 kgs in the region of 32 days production cycle, then you can put more beds on the same chicken house, and that way you can maximize your profitability per square meter, from the same house without even having to invest in extra infrastructure and all of that. So effectively what that means is that you have more stock turnover on the same capital investment that you have on your business. So that's that. I'm not sure. I believe that was our last question for the day. Unless if maybe there's another question on your side, Danny, maybe we can wrap up and encourage maybe viewers also to bring more questions as we prepare for our question and session our question and answer session next week. Yeah.
Sipho, thank you very much for your answer. I enjoyed that quite a bunch. Yeah, that was the last of our questions for this session. Please, guys, keep your questions coming. We'll have, as Sipho said, a question and answer session next week, same time, same place. Thank you so much for viewing today. See you next week.
Thank you.